A very good evening, everyone. So I'm very thankful for the lineage of Socrates and Plato that inspires us to engage in this course. And I'm also very thankful for your curiosity about the depth and true meaning of philosophy. Here it is like a trio: philosophy, death, and transformation. By the end of these 10 meetings, around 10 meetings, I'm sure that we will all be convinced that it is just one thing: philosophy, death, transformation. And I hope that we'll be able to get in touch with the meaning of this unified movement of philosophy, death, and transformation. Now, as you can notice, this course has been, at least momentarily, transformed into a purely online event, and this is for the simple reason that when there are even very few people who attend physically the talk, then my attention naturally goes to them, to those present in the room. And since most of the participants of this course, the clear majority is over there watching from home, it makes very little sense to be attentive or to focus my attention on the few who are present in the room. If at a certain point there will be a sort of a rebellion and many of you will ask to participate in one of the evenings physically, then of course I would be delighted to accommodate such an event and to do it together in the previously suggested format. But now, in this way, I'm certainly wholly, entirely with you. So, and I think this is a great advantage. So, last week we had a sort of a warm-up, a sort of introductory meeting, laying out the scene, the dramatic scene, and the basic world of the Phaedo, this book, this masterpiece of Plato. And surely you remember, or perhaps you don't remember, I should never take it for granted, that we ended our meeting with a sort of a cliffhanger, which was Socrates' outrageous, clearly provocative statement that a true philosopher should be very happy to die. And in a way wait for his death, his or her death. So this is certainly a statement, perhaps Socrates makes this statement because he wants to invite the participants to enter a serious philosophical discussion before his death. So it can be sometimes the way of a teacher, because Socrates was a spiritual teacher, a spiritual master, So it is sometimes the way of a spiritual master to shock the mind of the student in order to begin some deeper process. So we can definitely see it in this way, that Socrates wants to make a very provocative statement. Not that he thinks that it is completely wrong, but in the way he puts it, he shakes the room and makes everyone and draws everyone's attention. What we are going to enter this evening is the first argument. The first argument of Socrates in the Phaedo. He actually gives 5 arguments throughout this entire book. And perhaps first of all we need to understand what an argument is. I don't know if in German it is translated into something that is completely similar to what we know as arguing. Arguing against or entering an argument sounds quite negative, right? That you are debating with someone. But argument is simply stating that something is objectively true. Something is true. And to prove that this something is true, you use a chain of statements, and you usually start with a statement that is relatively acceptable by everyone, something that makes sense. And then if you suggest this statement and everyone says, yes, that makes sense, this is obvious, we agree, then you move to the next statement. And then you need to convince that this is also true based on the previous statement, which means if this is true, then surely this is true, and so on until you are able to lead safely and confidently to your last statement, which is your conclusion. So for example, if Socrates now says, philosophers should be happy to die. That's his final statement. You see? So now, this is his argument. Now he needs to prove his argument, and he needs to introduce a chain of true statements that ideally lead logically one to another, until hopefully everyone agrees with him that yes, philosophers should be happy to die. Now all this sounds extremely intellectual, and it is true, it is extremely intellectual. But what is important about the intellectual process especially of Socrates and Plato, but also very often in ancient Greece, is that the arguments are not there to prove something that is some kind of an academic, sterile statement. They are there to prove something that is actually beyond the intellect, beyond words, beyond the senses, something, a transcendent truth, something that is all about a state of being and we need to understand that in the mind of Greek philosophers, especially Plato, especially Socrates, but we can talk about others, to be rational, to be logical, to make such arguments is actually a reflection of the presence of the soul, or the presence of cosmic order. There is like a deep conviction that there is a deep cosmic order. And through your mind, through your intellect, when you are able to imitate this cosmic order through the order of your mind, through the clarity of your mind, you are actually aligning yourself with the higher order. So the very process may sound intellectual, but it is actually deeply spiritual. It's a spiritual process. And the way this spiritual process takes place is also noticed through a dialogue. And dialogue, you know that all of Plato's writings, except for some letters of his, are all dialogues. And they are not like some kind of theoretical essay. It's real people speak with real people. It's teachers, philosophy teachers speak to students. Sometimes they speak to other people, but what happens in this form of dialogue is of course that you present your arguments. But it's very different to present your arguments in an academic way and present your arguments to a living person, another person with whom your arguments are actually meant to transform eventually. You see? What you tell that person is not just something that makes sense and everyone should agree. You are talking about questions of life and death. You are talking about something that is meant to change the other person's worldview, perspective, experience. So, and to bring to an insight. So this format of dialogue makes everything very, very engaging, and it also engages us. We listen, we participate, we are a part of the dialogue. We think together with the students. We think together with the philosopher. And if we do it well, we allow ourselves to transform through the philosopher's instruction, living instruction. Now, what Socrates is going to show us in this first argument is basically how a philosopher, a true philosopher, should approach death. There are many ways to approach death, to face the actuality of death, and nobody can claim that Socrates is here playing with words, right? He is going to receive the hemlock poison. He is going to drink it. This is clearly his last talk in life. The fact that what he does until his breath is last is doing philosophy is of course very meaningful. But what Socrates now does is tell us what happens, how you, if you were a philosopher, would approach death, would face death. So let's enter now this world together. And And one second. And perhaps you have the text with you, perhaps you don't. I'm going to start from the very last sentence that we read. Tell this to Evenus, Cebes, wish him and bid him farewell, and tell him, if he is wise, to follow me as soon as possible. I am leaving today, it seems, as the Athenians so order it. So Simmias responds, what kind of advice is this you are giving to Evenus, Socrates? I have met him many times, and from my observation he is not at all likely to follow it willingly. As I said, for Simmias it sounds as if Socrates suggests that Evenus should commit suicide, to do it by himself. So Socrates says here in a provocative way, how so? Is Evenus not a philosopher? I think so, Simmias said. Then Evenus will be willing, like every man who partakes worthily of philosophy. So if you are a philosopher, that should be your position. Yet perhaps he will not take his own life, for that, they say, is not right. As he said this, Socrates put his feet on the ground and remained in this position during the rest of the conversation. Socrates is on his bed, and the fact that he is now putting his feet on the ground means that he is talking business. Now it's clear that they are entering the serious philosophical talk. Until this point, it was just light talk. Although we did have this beautiful insight of Socrates of the snake with two heads of pleasure and pain, which is of course relevant. But now this is going to be the actual talk. So he says, I don't mean that he should commit suicide. It's not about that. Then Cebes asked, how do you mean, Socrates, that it is not right to do oneself violence, and yet that the philosopher will be willing to follow one who is dying? So this sounds like a contradiction. If you are eager to die, you would happily commit suicide. Why wait, right? You will be happily jumping into your death. So Socrates says, come now, Cebes, have you and Simmias, who keep company with Philolaus, not heard about such things? Keep company. Philolaus was again a Pythagorean teacher, a teacher who studied with Pythagoras, and Simmias and Cebes were probably they attended his meetings, his satsangs. So he asks, because the Pythagoreans, they always deal with death, what happens after death, what happens to the soul, how to purify the soul, what happens in our rebirth, what rebirth we should expect. So he says, what aren't you well aware of all these points? So they say nothing definite, Socrates. Probably they want him to because they know that he will speak more clearly from a deep inner authority. Indeed, I too speak about this from hearsay, Socrates says, but I do not mind telling you what I have heard, for it is perhaps most appropriate for one who is about to depart yonder to tell and examine tales about what we believe that journey to be like. What else could one do in the time we have until sunset? So what is there to do until death except for doing philosophy? That is the only thing that one should engage in at every given moment, according to Socrates. And he says, perhaps some of the things that are about what happens after death are just rumors or legends. So there is a part of belief in what we say, because nobody can really say for certain, in certainty, what happens after death. Nobody can say 100% this is where we're going. Nobody can 100% say there is something at all, and not just deep sleep. So there is what we believe, what we are assuming, and there is what we know. And Socrates, as a philosopher, always makes sure that we distinguish what we believe from what we can know. So he is always careful about this point, and that is why when he just wants to say, this is perhaps, this is something that we should hope that will happen, and when he is certain, he says about this is 100% true. But whatever is the reason, and again we can see, if you know that you have only a few hours before you die, how would you spend them? What would you do? Would you cry? Would you try to experience most strongly what a life, like, I don't know, have a great meal, try to feel with your beloved ones the last moments? Perhaps. But for Socrates, what a philosopher does is making sure that one is closing one's eyes in the highest spiritual state, the greatest clarity. Just like the Tibetans guide us, for example, in the Tibetan Book of the Dead. You should be in your utmost clarity. If it is true that after death you are going to be transported into astral realms, then you are transported in a way that is completely transcendent, completely prepared. You are a luminous being. You have focused on what is real, what cannot be lost at the moment of death. So they are questioning him, but whatever is the reason, Socrates, for people to say that it is not right to kill oneself? Why shouldn't one kill oneself? If death is so great, let's just commit suicide. As to your question just now, I have heard Philolaus say this when staying in Thebes, and I have also heard it from others. But I've never heard anyone give a clear account of the matter. Well, Socrates says, he must do our best, we must do our best, and you may yet hear one. And it may well astonish you if this subject, alone of all things, is simple, and it is never, as with everything else, better at certain times and for certain people to die than to live. So Socrates says, it's not that I'm saying everyone should be happy to die. It is only for very specific type of people, the philosophers. Only they may state this and may experience this kind of passion for death. Other people, of course, what reason is for them to be passionate about death? Obviously, you should cling to whatever you know. And if this is so, you may well find it astonishing that those for whom it is better to die are wrong to help themselves, and that they must wait for someone else to benefit them. So he says, for these philosophers, they shouldn't try to die. They die, as soon as death comes, they embrace it happily, with love, with clarity. But it doesn't mean that they should do anything by themselves, actively. Why? And Kebis, lapsing into his own dialect because he probably lost control in response. He moved to his own specific dialect, not the Athenian dialect, laughed quietly and said, Zeus knows it is. Indeed, said Socrates, it does seem unreasonable when put like that, but perhaps there is reason to it. Now here Socrates gives us the reason why one shouldn't commit suicide. Sometimes they say in religion that you shouldn't commit suicide because it is a sin. But what is the depth of the reason to avoid committing suicide? There is the explanation that is put in the language of the mysteries. The language of the mysteries were sort of initiations that took place in temples in ancient Greece. That we men are in a kind of prison, and that one must not free oneself or run away. Now, it's very interesting because Socrates is exactly in this state. He is in prison, and he has decided not to free himself, not to run away. He could have escaped. Supported actually by Simmias and Kebis, they could have helped him to escape. But he chose not to do anything. He chose to accept his fate. Why? There is a very deep reason for it. And this is that Socrates used to have a sort of a divine sign, a voice. And the divine sign would tell him exactly when he was going to make a mistake. If he was about to do something and the gods, divinity, wouldn't want him to do it, he would be stopped by this divine sign. Sometimes he would even be encouraged by this divine sign to say something or to do something. And when Socrates was sentenced to death, the divine sign said nothing. For Socrates, this was a sign that he must not argue with this death. So, But he says that this should be the case of everyone. Of course, we can ask, but how do I know? For example, suppose I have illness, serious illness, and when do I know to let go, and when do I know to fight? So if we don't have a divine sign, like Socrates, that tells us when to let go, it's obviously that we are giving everything we can to avoid dying. But if we realize at a certain point that this is hopeless, that this is just already beyond the forces of the body, then this is the time when we let go. It is never perfectly clear. There is always a question here. So that seems to me an impressive doctrine, the doctrine that tells us not to run away, not to escape our prison, and one not easy to understand fully. However, Kebis, this seems to me well expressed, that the gods are our guardians, and that men are one of their possessions. Or do you not think so? So we cannot commit suicide because we are not the owners of our life. The violation here is not a sin, but an anti-philosophical act. It means that you don't understand what life is all about. When you understand that you were not born by your own choice, that your life is not your own, you also realize that death is not your own. When fate brings you to the moment of death, of course, you die, and in the case of the philosopher, you die happily, just like Socrates does. But until then, you don't belong to yourself. You are not the owner of your life, and you are not the doer of your life. So you cannot do such a thing. So Kebis agrees, and Socrates asks, if you are a possession of the gods, would you not be angry as the gods if one of your possessions killed itself when you had not given any sign that you wished it to die? So if you are perfectly healthy and you make the decision to take away your life, this is displeasing to the gods who have given you this life. So, and if you had any punishment you could inflict, you would inflict it. So it means that it's almost like a relationship of a slave and a master. You don't have your own life. And so the slave cannot take away his own life. Perhaps then, put in this way, it is not reasonable that one should not kill oneself before a god had indicated some necessity to do so, like the necessity now put upon us, which means, well, the whole of Athens decides to poison you to death. That seems like a strong enough sign, especially if you don't get another sign. You don't have the urge to escape.